My husband was in Ohio. He said it was for our future. I believed every excuse he gave. Then a message changed everything. I didn't expect what I found, and neither will you.
My name is Hannah Beeler. I am 32 years old. And for 5 years of my life, I waited for a man who never truly intended to come back. When my husband Eli left for Ohio, I was only 27 years. Our son Samuel was 3 years old and our daughter Ruth had just turned 1. He left in early spring. I remember the season because the Lancaster County fields were still frostbitten, that quiet cold that sits in the soil before planting time, the kind that makes the world feel held in suspension, waiting for something to begin. The whole family gathered at the farm gate to see him off. His mother, Mammy Beeler. My mother, Mammy Fisher. My father, Dottie Fisher. Samuel, who didn't fully understand what was happening, and little Ruth, bundled in her wool blanket. A group of neighbors had come too, as if it were a celebration, the way Amish communities do when one of their own sets off into the world beyond the county line. There is a particular word some use for that world out there. Die Welt, the world. Spoken with a quiet reverence that is equal parts curiosity and caution. Eli was happy, smiling, full of that energy men carry when they believe they are about to conquer something. I was happy too, I think. Or I convinced myself to be. He took my hands before climbing into the hired van and said, "Hannah, this is for us. For the children. In 2 years we will be together again, but with more savings and more stability." I held his hands. I believed him. And I let him go. The Amish tradition of Gelassenheit, a German word meaning yielding, surrender, or submission to God's will, teaches that one must let go of personal desires for the good of the community and the family. It is a beautiful teaching. But sometimes, in the wrong hands, it becomes the very reason a woman stays quiet when she should speak. I did not know that yet. I was still learning what surrender was supposed to mean. The first few months were what one imagines. Letters arrived every week because Eli did not use a telephone of his own, but had access to one through his employer at the construction firm in Holmes County, Ohio, where a large and established Amish community had long made their home. He described his rented room in a boarding house run by a Mennonite widow. He told me about the church gatherings on Sundays, how the Ohio Brethren sang the same slow hymns from the Osbun that we sang in Lancaster, how that sameness made the distance feel smaller. He said he missed me. He sent small things in the mail. Pressed wildflower. A postcard of a covered bridge. Small, ordinary things that felt precious because they came from him. The first year passed. Then the second. And the explanations for not returning began to change shape. First it was money. They hadn't saved enough yet. Expenses in Ohio were higher than expected. Then it was work. He had been given more responsibility and could not leave the job mid-project. Then came other reasons. He was helping a fellow church member through a difficult season. The timing was not right. Better to wait until things settled. Listened. I recorded the reasons in my mind as if they were verified facts and repeated them whenever anyone asked. When is Eli coming back? He is in the middle of a very important project. He cannot leave yet. When is Eli coming back? He was just given more responsibility. It is not a good time to step away. When is Eli coming back? Any day now. That is what I said. Any day now. 5 years of any day now. What weighed on me most was not the loneliness, though the loneliness was real and constant, the way a stone in your shoe is real and constant. What weighed on me most was raising the children alone without being able to say I was raising them alone. Because saying it would have meant admitting something I did not want to admit. So I juggled with words. Your dad is working very hard for you. Your dad misses you so much. Your dad is coming soon. Samuel started asking fewer questions over time. That hurt me more than his questions had. Ruth did not remember Eli well because she had been so small when he left. And that hurt too, but in a different way. We lived at Mammy Baller's farmstead. That was the arrangement. When Eli left, I would stay there with the children while he sent money, and as soon as possible, we would have our own home again. Mammy Beeler was a good woman. I will not say otherwise. But living in your mother-in-law's house when your husband is not there is a position that has no decent name in any language, English or Pennsylvania Dutch. You are there as a permanent guest, but without the treatment of a guest. You must help with everything. The milking before dawn. The bread before the men wake. The garden through summer heat. You endure the comments. You smile when you do not feel like smiling. You are grateful even when you are slowly disappearing inside. She said things without meaning to hurt me. Things like, I hope Eli finds there what he could not find here. Or, he was always very ambitious. You know that. Phrases I initially read as a mother's pride, but which over time I began to hear differently. I began to hear in them a kind of distance, as if she knew something I did not, and was quietly processing it aloud without saying it directly. But I did not want to see that. I kept not wanting to see it. It is worth knowing that in Amish communities, the extended family and the church district are the primary safety net. There are no government programs, no social workers, no outside interventions. When a marriage struggles, the bishop and the deacons may be consulted, and the community rallies around a family in need. This is its great strength. But it also means that private pain is often managed quietly, inside the walls of the home, because community reputation and church standing carry enormous weight. A woman in difficulty must decide very carefully how much to say, to whom, and when. I knew all of this, and so I said nothing. For years I said nothing. The turning point came when a woman named Miriam Yoder sent me a message. I did not know her well. We were acquaintances from the wider community, the kind of people one sees at barn raisings and quilting frolics and wedding celebrations, and greets warmly, but without real closeness. She had been living in the Holmes County area of Ohio for 3 years, having moved there when she married. Her message came through a mutual friend who had a phone, written on a small folded paper that was passed to me after the Sunday service. It said something like, Hannah, I have been wanting to write to you for a while, but did not know how. There is something I think you should know. I read that note 3 times before I replied. I felt something strange in my chest. The way one feels when you know what is coming but your body has not fully processed it yet. I sent back a reply through the same friend. Yes, go ahead. Miriam took 2 days to write back. 2 days during which I carried on with my normal life. I took the children to the one-room schoolhouse down the road. I helped Mammy Beeler with the preserves. I wrote to Eli one evening, a cheerful letter about Samuel's progress with his reading and Ruth's new habit of singing to the barn cats. He wrote back warmly. He told me he had attended a community barn raising organized by the local church district, that it had been a beautiful day, that there had been so many families. He did not tell me who he had stood beside. When Miriam's reply came, she told me this. That at that barn raising, Eli had arrived accompanied by a woman. That it was not the first time people had seen them together. That in the Holmes County church community, many had come to know them as a couple. That she herself had seen them at a pie social weeks before, sitting together, talking with that ease you do not have with work colleagues or casual acquaintances. Miriam told me she was very sorry. That she had hesitated a long time before writing. That she did not want to interfere, but that if she were in my position, she would have wanted someone to tell her the truth. I folded the note. I sat on the edge of the bed in my room, the room Eli and I had shared when we were newlyweds, which was now only mine, but which I had never felt was fully mine. And I did not cry. Not at that moment. Sometimes the greatest pain does not arrive with tears. It arrives with a kind of internal silence, as if something has switched off. I spent nearly a week saying nothing to anyone. Every time I tried to imagine the confrontation, something inside me closed. It was like wanting to open a door knowing that on the other side was something that would hurt you, and your body simply refuses. I continued with my routine. Took the children to school. Baked the bread. Helped with the farmstead. Spoke with Eli through our usual arrangement of written letters and occasional phone calls at the neighbor's house. Normal conversations. The kind where he talks about work and I ask about things that do not matter and we both pretend everything is fine. Meanwhile, I turned Miriam's words over in my mind at every hour. While churning butter. While waiting at the schoolhouse. While lying awake in the dark listening to the farmhouse settle around me. I told myself perhaps there was a misunderstanding. That small communities carry a great deal of talk and little accurate information. That Miriam had perhaps misread something completely innocent. But the way she had written did not sound like gossip. It sounded like someone who had hesitated greatly, who did not want to say it, who said it because she felt she had no other choice. I wrote to my cousin Leah Zook, who had married a man from a Mennonite community near Akron and was therefore more connected to Ohio than I was. I asked her to make quiet inquiries. I asked another woman from the Holmes County area, a woman I trusted more than I trusted Miriam, to tell me honestly what she knew. What I pieced together, fragment by fragment over nearly 2 weeks, was this. Eli and a woman named Katie Stoltzfus had been together for approximately 3 years. Katie was originally from an Amish family in Indiana, but had left the church in her 20s, what the community calls going English, and was now living a more modern life in Holmes County, Ohio. She worked at a small business that sold Amish-made furniture to English tourists. She was around 30, divorced with no children, and had met Eli at a community event shortly after his arrival in Ohio. First people said it was friendship, then it became more. And for over a year, they had been living together in the same house. Going English is the informal term used when an Amish person leaves the church and the community to live in the outside world. It is one of the most significant decisions a person from an Amish background can make. The community does not celebrate it, but the degree of separation varies greatly by district. Some families maintain contact, others practice meidung, shunning, a formal and painful severance of social ties meant to call the wayward member back to the faith. The weight of that possibility, of being shunned, of losing everything familiar, is one reason so many who leave never fully explain why. And one reason those left behind rarely know the full truth until it is too late. I did not know yet whether Eli intended to leave the church. I only knew that for 3 years, while I lived in his mother's house and raised his children and defended his name, he had been building a different life entirely. When I finally wrote to Eli to ask him directly, I did not send a letter. I arranged to speak with him by telephone through the neighbor's house on a Tuesday evening. The children were asleep. I sat in the farmhouse kitchen, a single oil lamp on the table, my hands folded in front of me. My heart was not racing with fear exactly. It was more that particular feeling the body has when it knows what is coming will change everything. He answered on the second ring. He sounded normal, cheerful even. I let him speak for a moment. Then I said his name. Just his name. Eli. And in the silence that followed before he said anything else, I knew he knew why I was calling. I asked him directly. Who is Katie Stoltzfus? Silence. Not the silence of confusion. The silence of someone calculating what to say. And in those 4 or 5 seconds, 5 years of waiting collapsed into something that has no precise name. What Eli said after that silence was this. Hannah, I need you to understand that things changed. That I changed. That it was not something I planned. That was all. No denial. No explanation that held any real weight. Only those words, spoken the way a man speaks when he has had a long time to prepare himself and has decided that 3 sentences will have to be enough. I asked him since when. He said nearly 3 years in a low voice. Without drama. The calmness with which he said it hurt me more than the information itself. Because it meant he had had time to process all of it. That for him it was not a crisis. It was simply the reality he had decided was his reality. And I was only just finding out. I asked if he was living with her. He said yes. I asked if he intended to return to Lancaster County. There was another silence. And then he said, I don't think that makes sense, Hannah. I set the telephone receiver back in its cradle. I said nothing more. I did not shout. I did not cry at that moment. I walked home in the dark across the quiet field, with the stars very clear above Lancaster County the way they are when there are no electric lights for miles, and I sat in the kitchen and stared at the wall. At some point I heard small footsteps. It was Ruth, who sometimes woke in the middle of the night the way small children do. She appeared at the kitchen doorway with half-closed eyes and asked why I was still awake. I told her I had been thirsty, that I was going to sleep now. She looked at me a moment longer, not entirely convinced, then padded back to her room. I waited for her breathing to slow, and then I cried. In silence, my face pressed into my hands so as not to make a sound, because 2 children were sleeping and Mammy Beeler slept in the room beside mine and I did not want anyone to hear me. That detail strikes me as significant now. Even in the most painful moment of my life, I was worried about not disturbing anyone. That says a great deal about how I had been living. I went to see Mammy Fisher, my own mother, on a Thursday afternoon. I told her I needed to speak with her alone. We sat in her room and I told her everything. My mother listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she took my hands and said, "Hannah, you already knew. Somewhere inside you, you already knew." She was right. Somewhere deep inside, I had known for a long time that something was wrong. I had known and chosen not to know, because not knowing was easier than facing what knowing would mean. My mother told me I had to make decisions. That I could not stay at Mammy Baller's farmstead indefinitely under these circumstances. That I needed to speak with our bishop, and possibly with an attorney, and that she and Dottie would support me. The words were right. The support was real. But at that moment, I was not thinking about bishops or practical decisions. I was thinking about Samuel and Ruth. Samuel was 8 years old. Old enough to sense that something was deeply wrong, but not old enough to process the full truth. Ruth was 6. Neither of them clearly remembered what it was like to live with their father, because he had left when they were barely more than babies, but both of them missed him in their own ways. Samuel missed him with questions. Ruth missed him with the drawings she sent him, little pencil sketches of the farm, of the barn cats, of me standing by the garden, which he always wrote back to say were beautiful. How do you tell an 8-year-old boy that his father is not coming back? That was what kept me awake those nights. Not the anger, though the anger was there. Not the humiliation, though that was there too. It was that specific, terrible question. How do I protect my children from something that cannot be made not to hurt? At the end of that week, Mammy Beeler came looking for me. I do not know whether someone had told her something, or whether she simply sensed it, the way mothers do even when they pretend not to. She found me sitting in the side yard one afternoon and sat down beside me without saying anything first. Then she asked, in a low voice, whether I had spoken with Eli. Said yes. She asked whether he had told me everything. And that question confirmed what I had begun to suspect. She knew. Not everything, perhaps. Not the details. But she had known for some time that something was going on, and had chosen to say nothing to me. I did not blame her in that moment. I do not blame her now. He was her son. Mothers protect their children even when their children do things that do not deserve protection. I understand that. But it also meant that I had lived under her roof, raised her grandchildren, defended her son's name, while she kept silent about something that directly affected me. That did hurt. It hurt in a way that took a long time to settle. She nodded when I told her I was trying to decide what to do. She did not apologize. She did not say anything more. She simply went back inside the house. And I sat alone in the yard, and for the first time in a long while, felt something different from sadness or anger. I felt a strange kind of clarity. The kind that comes when storm clouds finally break and the light returns so sharp and clean that everything looks different than it did before. I saw my life with that clarity for the first time. I saw that I had spent 5 years waiting for something that was never coming. That I had spent enormous energy holding up an image, defending a man who did not defend me. That I had raised 2 children practically alone while pretending I was not. That I had lived in someone else's house, feeling like I was only passing through without complaining, because complaining would have seemed ungrateful. And I saw that this had to end. I did not know exactly how. I did not know what shape my life would take. But sitting in that yard in Lancaster County, I knew that what had been could no longer continue, that I had to begin to build something that was mine. Divorce is not a simple matter in Amish communities. The Ordnung, the set of unwritten rules governing Amish life, varies by district, but most Old Order Amish communities strongly discourage it, and in some cases a divorced member may face church discipline or loss of standing. However, when a spouse has left the faith entirely, as Eli was moving toward, the situation is treated differently by many bishops. A spouse who has gone English, who has abandoned the community and the covenant of the marriage, is seen to have broken the bond from their own side. This does not make the legal and emotional process simple. But it does mean that Hannah would not be alone in her community. The church, at its best, closes around those who are left behind. I did not fully understand all of this at first. I learned it slowly, conversation by conversation, sitting with our bishop on his porch, listening to him explain the ways the community would support me and the children. It was one of the unexpected mercies of those months, that I was not as alone as I felt. I made the decision to leave Mammy Ballar's farmstead on a Monday morning. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no fight, no scene. I got up as always, made breakfast as always, and while I watched Samuel and Ruth eat with that calm concentration children have when they are hungry, I knew with a clarity I had not felt in a long time that I had to leave. That staying was continuing to live inside a story that was no longer true. I spoke with my parents that same week. I told them I needed a place to stay with the children while things were sorted out. My mother did not hesitate for a second. She said yes before I had finished the sentence. My father did too, though he spoke less and hugged more. That is his way of saying the important things. I told Mammy Beeler I was leaving. It was a short conversation. She did not protest. I think somewhere she knew it was the right thing, even if she never said so in those words. She helped me pack some of the children's things. And when we left, she gave me a hug that lasted longer than I expected. I do not know exactly what that hug meant, but I kept it with me. The formal separation and the legal proceedings that followed took time. Amish families, when dealing with matters that require legal engagement, often work through plain-friendly attorneys who understand the community's structures and values. There were documents and dates and conversations that summarized my marriage in terms so clean and legal and cold that it felt strange, like looking at a photograph of something that was once yours and no longer recognizing yourself in it. Throughout all of that, the hardest part was Samuel. He took it worse than I expected, though in hindsight it should not have surprised me. He became quieter. He asked fewer questions. But when he did ask, they were more direct and harder to answer. One afternoon, he asked me if his father had left because they were not enough. I had to breathe deeply before answering. I told him no. I told him that the decisions of adults have nothing to do with whether their children are enough or not. That he and his sister were the best thing that existed in the world. And that did not change with any adult's decision. That his father loved him. I knew that. But that sometimes adults do things that cause harm, even without meaning to. I do not know if it was the right answer. There is no guide for those conversations. You do what you can with what you have in that moment. Ruth processed things differently, the way small girls do when they do not yet have all the words for what they feel. There were weeks of tantrums over small things, and I knew the tantrums were not about what they appeared to be. There were nights when she wanted to sleep beside me, and I let her, even though we were both cramped in the narrow bed, because what she needed was to feel I was close. Those nights, I lay awake listening to her breathe, and thought that if anything made it worth the effort to keep going, it was this. That calm, trusting breathing of a child who believed the world was still safe because I was there. That held me together many times. I started working 6 months after leaving Mammy Ballar's farmstead. A woman in our church district ran a small quilt shop that sold to both local families and English visitors who drove through Lancaster County on weekends looking for handmade things. She needed help with the shop 3 days a week, and she offered the position to me quietly, without making it feel like charity, which was its own kind of grace. It was not grand work. But there was something in getting up each morning with a purpose beyond the farm and the children that made me feel something I had not felt in a long time. That I was a whole person. Not just half of something that no longer existed. The quilting tradition itself carried a quiet lesson I had always known but had not truly understood until then. A quilt is made of pieces, often mismatched, often from garments that are worn out or torn. Nothing is wasted. The scraps become the pattern. The pattern becomes the warmth. You do not need perfect, unbroken fabric to make something beautiful and useful. You need only the willingness to sit with what remains and work it into something new. I thought about that often those mornings in the shop, my hands moving through the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. There were difficult moments I did not expect. Once, word reached me through a mutual acquaintance that Eli had indeed left the church. That he and Katie were living a fully English life in Ohio. That he had cut his hair and put aside the plain clothes, and was living in a way unrecognizable from the young man who had stood at our farm gate in the early spring with his whole life ahead of him. I sat with that information for a long time. Not just sadness. Not just anger. Something closer to disbelief that the life he was now living had been built on top of mine. That every step toward that life had been a step away from Samuel and Ruth and me, taken quietly, over years, while I defended him. I did not linger in that feeling. I let it come and I let it go and I continued with my day. That too was progress. Even when it did not feel like it. With time things settled. Not all at once. Not in the way of stories, where there is one clear moment where everything improves and you can say, here is where the good part began. That is not how real life works. It was more of a slow accumulation. Days that were a little lighter than the ones before. Weeks that felt less like surviving and more like living. Small moments building without my noticing, until one day I looked back and saw how far I had come. Samuel began to talk more again. He started asking questions with the curiosity of a boy exploring the world, rather than the fear of one bracing for bad news. Ruth went back to her drawings and began to draw happier things. Animals. The countryside. Her classroom at the schoolhouse. One day she drew me. I had a prayer cap and a long dress and big eyes, and I was smiling. Below the drawing in her careful unsteady letters she had written, "My ma'am is brave." I burst into tears at that. The good kind. The kind that bring relief rather than weight. I still keep that drawing in my room. If there is something I learned from all of this, and I do not say it to teach anyone a lesson because that is not my place, it is this. One can spend a great deal of time waiting for something external to change so that your life can finally begin. Waiting for the other person to return. For the situation to improve. For the circumstances to be right. And sometimes that waiting makes sense. And sometimes it is the slowest and most painful way of not living. I waited 5 years. I do not say it was a mistake to wait because at the time it was what I could do with what I knew. But I do say that the day I stopped waiting was the day I began to truly live. Not a perfect life. Not a life without complications. But a life that was mine. With my decisions, my mistakes, my children, my parents, my work, my good days and my hard days. A life that did not depend on someone else coming home in order to have meaning. Sometimes Samuel speaks with his father by telephone through an arrangement we have made. Eli calls regularly. That much should be acknowledged. The children have a relationship with him that I do not interfere with because it is not my place, and because they have a right to their own bond with their father regardless of what happened between him and me. It is not easy, but it is not as hard as it used to be. It is simply a part of the new life. I do not know what will happen with Eli and Katie. I do not think about it in the way I once would have. What I think about is here. In this small cottage on rented farmland that is finally mine. With the children's coats hanging on the pegs by the door. With the smell of bread I bake myself. With the sound of Samuel working through his reading in the other room. And Ruth singing something to herself in the kitchen that makes no sense, but that I love to hear. That is what remained after everything broke. And it is more than I thought would remain. I am 32 years old and I feel for the first time in a very long time that the days ahead belong to me. Hannah Beeler, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania.